I'm Dr. Samuel Acuff. I am a research scientist at the Recovery Research Institute in the Department of Psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital. Today we're here with Dr. Brandon Bergman, who's the Associate Director of the Recovery Research Institute and an Assistant Professor at Harvard Medical School. How's it going, Dr. Bergman?
That's going well.
Good. Glad to have you here. Today I want to talk to you about a really cool initiative that the Recovery Research Institute puts out every month called the Recovery Bulletin.
Yep.
Tell me, what is the Recovery Bulletin?
So the Recovery Bulletin is, like you mentioned, it's a monthly publication where we take the latest science on addiction treatment and recovery, so substance use and related disorders, and we summarize this research, we translate it into what we hope are actionable kinds of steps for different stakeholder groups, so clinicians, policymakers, administrators, and then also for people in or seeking recovery themselves and their family members.
Yeah, that sounds like really helpful. I'm curious, why did the Recovery Research Institute decide that this was necessary? Why is it important?
So there's just a ton of impactful science on treatment and recovery being conducted. And so what the Bulletin does is it distills some of these most important findings and the most timely and relevant studies in ways that we hope are really accessible for all these different stakeholder groups. And when I talk about access, I'm both talking about making the findings more accessible so that they're more digestible, right, for these different stakeholder groups. So we have visuals in each of these summaries, and then at the end of each bulletin, there's a bottom line where we talk about the take-home messages for each of these stakeholder groups. So it's accessibility in that way, but then also literal access, where for many people, scientific articles themselves are hard or impossible to access because they're often behind paywalls. And so what our bulletin does is summarizes the science so that people actually have access to the findings themselves and then can decide how they want to use those findings in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, so kind of two-pronged, making it more easy to access in terms of getting the science, but also comprehension, being able to explain it in a way that makes sense to all the stakeholder groups out there, speaking their language. So with that in mind, like who is the Recovery Bulletin for? Like who might be reading it?
The Bulletin is meant for clinicians, for policymakers, for administrators, for people in or seeking recovery themselves or their families. I mean, basically, it's meant for anybody who wants to learn more about what the science has to say when it comes to treatment and recovery from substance use and related disorders.
Yeah. And if you were to open an issue of the Recovery Bulletin, what are the types of topics you might find?
So the topics run, when it comes to treatment and recovery, the entire spectrum of ways that people might initiate or sustain recovery. So we're talking here about clinical approaches. So these would be like talk therapies, medications, for example. We're also talking about non-professional services, so recovery support services, mutual help organizations, recovery community centers, education-based recovery supports like collegiate recovery programs and recovery high schools, for example. And then we're also looking at people that don't seek out any services at all, but might be initiating or sustaining recovery. Sometimes people will call these unassisted pathways or self-management pathways. Occasionally, they'll also be called natural recovery, right? So it really runs the gamut in terms of different recovery pathways. And then we're also looking at it from the lens of different kinds of populations, so different kinds of substance use disorders, different characteristics, so looking at recovery experiences by age, gender identity, for example, race and ethnicity, and then certainly other kinds of special topics in terms of people that might have very specific experiences. So perhaps, for example, veterans we often cover. And then finally, we think about recovery and we look at it in the bulletin in terms of different kinds of processes. So for a given individual, a study might examine recovery from a social perspective. How do their social networks change? From a psychological perspective, how are their cognitions and their emotional experiences changing? We could be looking at how someone's biophysiology or their neurobiology, right? What's going on in the brain as people are in recovery, and how do those change? And then finally, those are kind of more micro perspectives, right? Like kind of within an individual and their family. But recovery happens within a context, right? In people's neighborhoods or their cities or their states or even nationally, right? So we also look at the impact that different policies might have, right, on someone's ability to initiate and sustain recovery over time.
There really there's a wide range of research that could be covered in a bulletin, and so many different people in different walks of life, different professional backgrounds probably could find some use out of it.
That's the hope. Yeah,
that's the hope. Well, where could someone go to find the bulletin and maybe start getting access to it each month it comes out?
Yeah, so the bulletin is free for the general public. If somebody wants to access the bulletin, there are two different ways. One, you go to the Recovery Research Institute website, recoveryanswers.org. They could sign up for the bulletin so that it gets delivered right to their email inbox each month. And then within a given month, there might be a particular month's newsletter with typically 8 summaries, 8 or so. In addition, we archive every summary also at the Recovery Research Institute website. So any summary that's ever been covered within one of our monthly newsletters lives on in perpetuity at the Recovery Research Institute website, and people can also access summaries that way as well.
Lots of reading material.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Dr. Bergman.
Thanks for having me.